Well, welcome everybody. I'm Catherine Boyle with Key Ministry. Thank you for joining us today on our, fourth, fifth, sixth Wednesday webinar that we've had since we've all entered this strange and uncharted territory with COVID-19. Today I'm joined with Janyne McConnaughey, PhD. Janyne is an expert in trauma, and she's a very funny lady. And so when we decided we wanted to have somebody come talk about trauma, I immediately thought of Janyne because it's a difficult topic in so many ways, in particular because this is personal for Janyne and it's personal for many people who are probably watching and have joined us today. But we want to talk about trauma with Janyne, certainly from a personal perspective, but also from the perspective of how being trauma informed or understanding a little bit about trauma can really help families who may be struggling as they're at home, individuals certainly, but also churches and ministries as they are, working remotely, but working hard to support the people in their church families and also in their broader communities who may be struggling with the impacts of trauma while they're staying at home. So Janyne, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I just want to throw out, Janyne is on the West Coast, so she had to get up really early today to make this happen, and I'm so grateful. Thank you for doing that. So how is everything going?
We are, it started first here, and I so appreciate this opportunity.
Because you're in the Seattle area, right?
Yes, we're in the Seattle area, and actually I was in Atlanta for the Attachment and Trauma Network Trauma Sensitive Schools. I'm on the board for the organization, and I was at their conference, and I flew home kind of into the midst of it, because when I got home, everything started happening. It was February 19th, so it was a week before Mardi Gras, and I realized, oh, this is a problem. This is a problem, and so
Right.
so I immediately started isolating. I didn't like being called elderly, but okay, whatever. And so, but I thought, I need, and we live in, we moved to Seattle, and we live with my daughter and her two children. And so we have 5 people in the house, and she's an assistant principal in a school, so she's still working. So we can't completely isolate. And
Right.
and so we're doing the best we can. But yeah, so
Right.
we've been at this a long time, really long time already. So
Yeah.
but we're everyone I know who, in fact, my publisher and my book designer both have had the virus.
Oh goodness,
And
wow.
my book cover designer, and who is also my sister-in-law, and they're recovering, and I'm very grateful for that. And
Yeah.
so it's been, yeah, we've been in the thick of it. So
Yeah, goodness. Well, so hang on a second, I'm trying to do something with the live stream and can't do that. So there we go. Well, so tell us a little bit about why you are an expert in trauma. I mean, that seems like an odd career choice for anybody to take or make, but goodness, yeah. We're grateful for trauma experts, especially at times like this, because I don't want to make it trivial or in any way, but everybody is feeling a little shell-shocked with what has gone on, and certainly by now, you're obviously experiencing coronavirus fatigue, just because it has gone on for so long. I know other parts of the country are starting to feel that way as well. So, so tell us a little bit about why trauma is something that, has become your area of expertise.
Well, it surprises me. And in fact, when I saw the description, I was like, oh, I don't know. But then I realized that I am very involved in the trauma-informed movement, that not only my personal story but also being on the board of directors for the Attachment and Trauma Network, and the circles that I move in, and the books that I write, and the research that I did. And so my story is that I was abused as a little girl at the age of 3 in a home daycare, and and what happens to children is they become so vulnerable that the abuse just continues to happen. And I was in a middle class. My dad was a pastor. My mother was a teacher. I had 2 older brothers. I lived in a nice community. It had none of the markers of continual sexual abuse to the degree that I had. So, but the key factor was that my mother had her own mental health issues and was not able to provide the care I needed when that happened. And that continued to reap in my life. And but I repressed it all because I'm a little girl whose father is a pastor, and I need to get up and go to church and behave myself and be the good girl and not exhibit all those trauma behaviors. And so I just repress them. And I taught in Bible colleges for 33 years, and I was an educator. And I, at the age of 61, I fell down a rabbit hole. And all of a sudden, all of the memories surfaced, the trauma surfaced, and I ended out in intensive therapy for really 3 years and 5 years of healing. But I already had a PhD. So my therapist was continually bringing me back to, you need to feel this in order to heal. And I was continually trying to drag myself into the research side of it. Well, let's figure out what's going on here. So between the 2 of those, I began to learn everything that I could about trauma, and then I embedded those in the books, what I learned in the books that I wrote. So I have 2 books out. Another one will be coming out before the end of the year. As I said, my publisher became ill, and so everything has gotten delayed during this time. So, and I just want her to be well. Goodness.
Right. Oh,
and so. Yeah, she stepped in and published my book, reached out to me about it. So she is a very important person in my life. So I was very concerned. So, but all of that to say that, and as a teacher educator, I realized, oh my goodness, I've taught generations of teachers, and we never talked about trauma. Mm-hmm. We knew that bad things happened to kids, but we didn't know the effect that it had on them. And so right. Through that whole process, but I just want to say that I lived the majority of my life with PTSD, a dissociative very close to full-fledged dissociative identity disorder, except that I was able to kind of control the amnesia part of it. And also it's a myriad, depression, anxiety. I lived with that my whole life. And then I healed. And I am so grateful that I did all that hard work, because I would be a mess right now in the middle of this. Mm-hmm. I know the way that it would have affected me. And I'm so grateful that God led me to seek healing, and to a therapist who was totally dedicated to help me. So that's kind of my story, how I ended out here. So.
Well, is this traumatizing for you to be at home right now? I mean, is this triggering things that you have worked through already, or that, I mean, what's it been like for you as somebody who has lived through trauma and done the hard work to get beyond just the wounds?
I just want to say that the trauma-informed therapy, the type that I did, which included EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and my determination to just keep walking toward the bear, just keep walking toward it in determination to heal. I find myself in such a good place. And but at the same time, and when I say I find myself in a good place, that means that when I start to rumble, I know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people, and I did too, I had this idea of what healing would be, some kind of nirvana, where I was trying not to feel anything again, which is how I got in the mess in the first place. And that isn't how we do this. We do this by understanding our own emotions, being able to sit with them, being able to calm ourselves. Calming ourselves is what healing is all about, is to be able to calm yourself. So you asked me how I'm doing in this, and honestly, I pushed myself my whole life to do so much. And I'm still one of those kinds of people, even though, but inside me is a little girl who just wanted to sit in her bed and cry, or just be alone in her room, or, and so when they told me I couldn't go anywhere, I was like, yes.
Right. Yeah. The moment introverts have waited for all of our lives, right?
And I know that that's not true for other people.
Right.
So, and I want to say that when I answer that question, I can only answer that question for me. But I know that for other people, it's very, very different. And this is so, in fact, I got up this morning and I kind of checked on my friends on Facebook, and I think 5 of them had a meltdown. They posted a meltdown because they miss being with people and hugging people, and so but I'm less isolated than I was before, because nobody goes to work, nobody goes to school, right? So I think that's hard for me. So there's that other side of it where people are also struggling because they have to be together all the time.
Right.
For the introvert, that's really difficult. So everybody has a different take on it, but I'm just so thankful that I'm okay.
Right.
I wouldn't have been. Would have been catastrophic thinking.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, so I mean, it definitely seems that, I mean, we know just anecdotally from information that's trickling out about mammoth increases in calls to suicide helplines, prevention helplines, of course. And then, information about ER admissions and that sort of thing, that there is a lot of conflict and just incredible dysfunction that's happening inside homes. So, I guess for families who are really struggling with maybe a loved one, a child who has lived through a trauma, what are some things you can recommend to them to look for that might help them understand that, hey, this isn't just garden variety anxiety. There's something a little deeper going on here that maybe we've been so busy, going about our daily lives that we haven't recognized before. What are some things that you would suggest that parents look out for?
And I want to say, there's an illustration where when a cup gets tipped over, whatever is in the cup gets tipped out. Mm-hmm. And so, but to see the cup sitting there, you don't know what's inside of it. And I feel like that is our society, is that we've had this nice cup sitting there, and we have not as a society been addressing the mental health issues that are inside the cup. And mm-hmm. what isolation did was it knocked the cup over and it just spilled out everywhere. And I think mm-hmm. that what we're seeing is yes, the pressure of the isolation, but we're actually seeing what was already existing in our nation just being laid bare in front of everyone. The disparities, because this is not the same experience for everyone. Not everyone has this lovely home that I'm isolated in. And not everyone has the luxury of not going out. And so you take that and so yes, we are hearing, in fact, my husband Scott was just reading something to me this morning about the increase, especially for very young children, of showing up at hospitals with abuse, because they're in the home. They can't take them to the sitter. They can't take them to the daycare, and maybe they're trying to work and the kids are with them, and it's just such a difficult situation. Teachers are teaching their children virtually while they have their kids in their class, while they've got their own children on their hips, right? And so so many layers to that. So what do we I may need to be redirected because I kind of went off on that, but
I mean, I thought your illustration with the cup is a great one. So things are coming out, so some things that parents can identify that can say, yeah, that's a little bit deeper than just my child is anxious because we're in this time where things are suddenly so different. What are some things that you would advise that that might be something that they should talk with their physician or a therapist about?
All right. So I think that yes, there is some possibility that in our busy lives, I mean, my parents were really busy. My dad was a church planner. They were at the church all the time. They just missed a lot of what happened to me, and my only communication was my behavior. But we tend to look at behavior as something that needs to be controlled instead of something that's communicating.
Right.
And so children will not come to you and say, I'm having a breakdown.
Right.
Your best friend might do that, but your children are not going to come to you and say, of course, we've talked enough about this that my grandkids kind of do. You know what? I think I'm having a breakdown today, but and at ATN, my ATN people, they have been so busy. And in my handout that you have that you're going to post, there's several resources, there's videos and so forth. And here's the thing about trauma-informed parenting, is that it is about the parent being calm, which if you have a trauma background, it's very hard to stay calm right now, because this is triggering a lot of your own fear of being controlled, fear of being isolated, fear of not being able, of being helpless, so forth. But it is that the parent can stay calm, and we have a lot of resources out there, videos and different things to try to help parents. We even have support groups. There's even a support group Zoom meeting you can sign up for on Friday afternoons if you have children that are exhibiting different difficult behaviors. So, but in order for the children,
hang on a second, and that's through the Attachment and Trauma Informed Network.
Right. And so those are my people. So I'll probably mention that, like, I don't know how many times in this. So, if the parent can remain calm and be receptive to the feelings that the child is having, and this isn't just for kids who've had trauma. One thing in talking about trauma sensitive schools, people are like, how can we have this kind of behavior plan or whatever for trauma kids and then something else for the other kids? But that's not the point. Good parenting is good parenting, or good teaching is good teaching. And when we work to keep ourselves calm, and we come in low, and we interact with kids in ways that are respectful and validate what they're feeling, and help them to build skills in regulating their own emotions by mirroring that regulation with them, then that changes the whole dynamic. So let me give an example of that. And so you asked me about if you think your child is exhibiting, and I think it's really hard to tell maybe right now, because they may be exhibiting really excessive behaviors because they might be feeding off our stress that we're exhibiting. And so, I mean, and what you have to do is help them feel safe enough so that if there is something they need to tell you, they feel safe enough to tell you. Okay, so I say that, and then you need to get professional help if that's true. So when we began, my daughter was still working, and I have a 15-year-old and so close to 11, I'm going to call her an 11-year-old. Her birthday's next week. And so we were grandparents put in charge of keeping them on track with their virtual schooling. And so we started out by, here's the schedule, and this is when you're going to do this and this and this, and they just flipped out. There's no other word to describe it. And we were trying to control them, so I wrote a blog that I post for ATN, and it was posted last night. So I'm thinking about this. And I sat back and I said, you know what? I need to apply my trauma-informed parenting skills here. And because these kids are grieving. They've right. lost, they've lost opportunities that they've had. They can't be with their friends. They're grieving. Right. This is so hard for them. And so what we did was we decided, okay, here's your list for the day. My daughter prints it off. They get it off the computer in the morning, and they decide how they want to complete their list. And it has worked beautifully. Absolutely. I mean, they're older, so
right. Right.
You have to have more direction with younger kids. But what we did was we stopped trying to control them.
Right.
And so I think that, I mean, it's like if you stand in front of an ocean wave, and you see a big wave coming. I'm a Californian to begin with, but you see a big wave coming, you've got to dive under it. Mm-hmm. It's a mistake to stand there and say, I'm going to stop you.
Right, right.
Because you are going to drown when that wave hits you. And that's kind of what we do to kids, is we try to control the behaviors instead of coming in low, just flowing with them and helping them to work through the problem. And so, and if we do that, then these kids that maybe have something that they need to tell us, and maybe we're around more and they have the opportunity to do it, they'll feel safe enough. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really gets to how important it is to use this time, maybe indirectly, to help the kids develop their own coping strategies, because, this is going to build into their lives for far beyond this crisis. And, when we develop those healthy kind of coping strategies, then that helps really build up resilience in our lives, so that, because everybody's going to have hard things that come, this one is just affecting everybody literally on the planet. But,
yes.
Having resilience, it's just so important. And it seems like that's something that is just a lacking quality in a lot of kids these days. And it seems like it would, from my perspective, it seems like it would be maybe very different, because we have a much more informed culture about mental health issues. But in some ways, kids are still really having a hard time learning how to cope through difficult days. So I think that's real wisdom that you shared.
Sorry, I didn't mean, I thought your sense said that. I didn't mean to interrupt. There's a great video out there about people interrupting each other on Zoom.
Yeah, with internet pauses too. Yeah.
So I think that I was on a panel for Lake Washington Foundation here in Washington. It was a panel on teen mental health. And kind of surprised I ended out on the panel, but I was like, okay. So I sat between two teenagers. They were wonderful. But what they said was that they really didn't understand their own emotions. Mm-hmm. They really didn't. And they didn't understand that their emotions were what they were feeling inside their body. They were frightened by what they were feeling inside of their bodies, and they didn't have any words to describe it. They didn't understand. And we tend to just talk about feelings being in our head, that we think feelings. No, we feel feelings. It's in our body. Right. And from my own personal experience, the lack of understanding of my own feelings and emotions probably caused more mental health issues than anything else that happened to me. And so trauma, the traumatic event, horrible as it was, I needed on the other side, I needed adults to help me understand that the emotions I was feeling in the aftermath of that were absolutely normal. That way my brain, that my amygdala was firing every second of the day. That I mean, my family kind of laughed because it's like I walk through life. In my next book, I talk about how I walk through life just taking snapshots of everything. I was just hyper vigilant to the max. If somebody wanted to know where something was, oh, I know right where that is. I took a picture of that under the stairs in my brain. And so that's what these kids are, but they don't realize that these emotions are natural. I did, when I spoke at Liberty University, I talked about created to survive, and I talked about the brain and how it is created to help us survive. But when there's nothing that we're trying to survive, all it does is just create all of these emotions and feelings inside of us that we don't know what to do with. And so so this is the perfect time for us as parents. I love the Zoom youth meetings and Zoom children's meetings, and at our church, the children's pastor is having snack with the kids, where they get on Zoom and they bring their snack, and all of those kinds of things, to just have these conversations. That's really what we need, are conversations, and help them to understand their feelings, because those teenagers didn't understand their feelings. They didn't understand that feelings come like a wave. And if we try to hold them tight, which is what I did, I tried to hold them tight and control myself so I could behave. Here, see my jaw clench? I'm watching myself. I'm like, stop, we're loosening that jaw. Okay, so so I just needed to be able to let the feeling wash over me, because in 90 seconds, it's gone.
Right.
And that's what these kids, they need space to let that wash over them, or else it's going to come out in bad ways.
Yeah, and it's so intense for teenagers as well, because everything is new, and it's the first, when they get through puberty, all those feelings are not things that they're accustomed to from being little kids. So yeah, I mean, it can be very difficult for them to understand what's going on. And I don't know if you had a chance to watch our interview last week, but we talked with Jonathan Holmes, who's a biblical and pastoral counselor, and he talked about how emotions are great passengers, but they're terrible drivers. And so, yeah, you don't want to be led by your emotions, because you get in all kinds of trouble. They're not intended to be in charge, but they are great to tell you. Yeah, they are great to tell you, to pay attention to certain things that are going on, natural or maybe beyond, what is expected in a circumstance. And if that's the case, then, certainly get some help for it. But I thought that was such a great metaphor.
Dan Siegel calls it flipping your lid.
Okay.
And he uses the brain model, and this is your amygdala, this is your brain cortex, this is the very fight, flight, freeze located down here. The amygdala is your warning system, the hippocampus is in there, your brain cortex, frontal cortex. This is where thinking takes place.
Right.
But when the amygdala gets fired, it flips your lid. Mm-hmm. and you start your thinking from your emotions, and that's what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that, and one of the things that we do to kids is that when they do something, you're just like, what, why did you do that? I don't know. And they don't know, because they weren't, their thinking part of their brain was not online when they did it. They were living out of they were being triggered. They may be living out of the cortex. And one thing about behavior, like if you watch behaviors that are kind of erratic, they look like fight, flight, fight, or freeze. Like the kid will just shut down, and it seems like they're refusing to do what you say, but that's not actually it. I was shut down queen. Okay, they just shut down because they've been triggered, or they might run Okay,
Right.
that's coming out of that. Or they might be angry and try to fight you. And so really, if you look at behaviors as being triggered, the amygdala is sending signals that you're in danger. And especially kids who've experienced trauma, there is no pause place. And I think that one of the most important things we can teach kids is that to find that little pause, that little tiny place between where the amygdala gets triggered and we flip our lid, so that we can try to calm ourselves and keep that. So, and I think that that's so important for us to understand with kids who've been traumatized, is that they have no pause place, because they've been in danger too many times, and their survival is based on reaction. And
Right.
so, yeah, so yes, the emotions are very valid, but we have to be able to think about our reactions to the emotions. But
Right.
kids who've experienced a lot of trauma have a really difficult time doing that. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, I just want to throw out here real quick, if you're participating with us today, either on the webinar or if you're watching on Facebook Live and you have any questions for Janyne, please go ahead and submit those in the chat in either place. We are monitoring both of those, and we'll try to get answers and information to you, you know, before the end of the hour here. You know, people, it seems to me like, you talk about waves. It seems like people are having emotional waves with COVID. You know, the first week or so, it was just sort of fun. There were lots of social media comments about, you know, how it was basically like going on a camping trip, and then people kind of got past that and maybe were a little sad for a while, but then they kind of revved up again, and you know, and gained some strength. But it seems to me, what I'm seeing anyway, is that the people are starting to really get tired now. And so what hope and encouragement would you offer, either from a personal or professional perspective, that also ties in scripture, relationship with Jesus, you know, to help really you know, deal with the ebb and flow that we're all feeling in this time?
Yeah, and I think that in fact, tomorrow I start a Zoom Bible study for my church. It's a 3-week connection point where they're just trying to do connection points with people. And so it was completely up to me. I could choose what I wanted to do, which I get really excited about because I love being creative. And so I woke up Saturday morning and I was like, just breathe. Oh, that's it. This is all about breathing, you know. And so I'm doing the 3 weeks on breathing, and I think about how God created us to breathe with his breath. You know, he breathed life into, and so we were created. Breath is so important, and really that's what this whole pandemic is about, is we're just trying to keep as many people breathing as we can, right? But there's physical breathing and there's spiritual breathing. And so I want to give my answer in 2 points, because there's a teacher in me. See that right there? Because people, and I talk about this in my next book, which is my faith book. People, I've had so many people who are faithful members in the church, love God, very, very, I just amazing people, serving, doing, and they write me and they say, I feel like a spiritual failure. And I'm like, oh, me too. You know, that's kind of what my 3rd book is about, is how trauma kept me from experiencing the abundant life like I felt like other people were experiencing. So I want to say, I got up this morning, I'm like, no, I don't want to say that, God. I really, no, I don't want to go there, right? But I think I need to say that for me, my entire life, because of the ways that my abuse occurred, which were mostly in the church and by people who were quoting and speaking scripture to me, sometimes I have a very difficult time receiving encouragement from scripture. And so I think that you know, one of the questions was about how can we make our churches trauma informed. I left some resources in the in my handout, that one of really good resources, and a podcast that I did, or a webinar that I did, that you can access on that. But I think that when I got to your question about this, right, I felt that, and then I was like, okay, we're going to be okay. This is not that. This is not what happened to me then. This is what God is doing in my life right now. Mm-hmm. And so I immediately went to where Jesus said, I have come to heal the brokenhearted. Mm-hmm. And I thought about my own story, and very, like, probably I was in my mid 40s, and struggling, depression, horrible anxiety, all sorts of things. Nobody even knew. I was so strong. Nobody even knew what I was going through. And I was in bed just crying one day, and God said, healing is coming. You know, I didn't know it was going to be 20 years in the future.
Right.
But healing did come. God made a promise to me, and God kept that promise. And so that verse where Jesus says, I come to heal the brokenhearted, is everything to me. Mm-hmm. Because I think that for all the other reasons that Jesus came, that he wanted to help brokenhearted people heal. Mm-hmm. And I think in the middle of all of this, which is a tragedy, sadness, we're losing loved ones and friends, people are losing their livelihood, so, you know, kids have lost so much, they're frightened, they don't get it. I think that in the midst of this, God is saying to our world, I want to help heal. I'm here to help heal. And for me, that meant that one day God made it very clear to me that I needed to go and see a therapist. And so we talked about, one of the questions talked about how do we access therapy? It was hard enough to find trauma-informed therapy before. Right. So I thought, you know, what therapists are learning is that online therapy in some ways works really well.
Right.
Maybe for trauma, not completely, but it isn't that it doesn't work at all. Right. That relationships can be built. So I went to, and on my website, I have under the about information, I have how to find a therapist. So and what I say to do, I give lines for using Psychology Today. You can click, I want a Christian therapist, I want them to be able to do EMDR. You can choose all sorts of things. Well, I went back in there and I noticed that they're saying whether they have online therapy or not.
Oh, that's good.
And so actually this might be because everybody's too busy. I mean, everybody I talk to, well, I just don't have time to do therapy. Well, guess what?
Right.
And so it might be a time when, like me, that God will say to someone, hey, you need some support right now. This might be a good time to get access. And so I wanted to, and then I think it's important to realize that, I think on my healing journey, I realized that God was trying to bring me help in many ways that I did not know. Mm-hmm. That God was working every single day to help me, but I didn't recognize all of those ways, or didn't face all of those ways. And I think right now churches can learn to be more trauma informed, so that when they do connect with people, then they understand maybe telling them what scriptures read is not going to be the most beneficial thing for everybody, right?
Right.
Maybe it
Right.
is for some people. And I know I diverge, that's like in the shower this morning, I'm like, no, God, I don't think you want me to say that on this particular key
No,
ministries. And
it's
so,
okay.
but I think it's important that for many, many people that I know, they can sit down with the Bible. I'm jealous of them because they can sit down with their Bible and they can spend 15 minutes in prayer and reading, and they come out a new person, right? That is so helpful. And I wish that was true for me. I wish
but
my story hadn't prevented me from that. So
that's
I'm
okay. Yeah, but Jesus still gave you that one passage, I mean, I think that's, so, I mean, he did give that to you.
right. And I think that, and there are several, so it's not that,
Right.
I think that, and I actually went to a Bible journaling class where I took one of my Bibles and we drew in them and we
Right.
did artwork in them. And,
Right.
and for me, that transformed my Bible for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to find really creative ways. I'm determined,
Yeah.
I'm like, I will not be robbed of this.
Right.
But I have to acknowledge my own feelings about it and how they got there. Right. So, yeah. So
I think those are excellent suggestions for people because everybody doesn't, I mean, we certainly don't all have the same backgrounds and everybody doesn't have the same way that God communicates with us and that God will, that Jesus will really step into our brokenness and bring healing. So I do have a few things I want to get to that have been shared in the chat. So couple of quick things. A lady in the panel, in the chat said that her pastor has released a book called Breathe Again. His name is Ed Newton. He's lead pastor at Community Bible Church in San Antonio. Do you know him? You're smiling.
I'm smiling because when I had this just breathe moment, I went and Googled, books, breathe, went to Amazon, and that book came up, and it was published 10 days ago. It's beautiful.
Oh, I mean, wow. Okay.
And so, yes, I'm using, so tell her to communicate that with her pastor, that it was God send to me. And so I'm using it in my Just Breathe Zoom Bible.
Excellent. Okay, so I've got a couple of different, she just said that she will, so that's awesome.
Okay. Oh yeah, so, I can talk to her. I'm not seeing her.
Right, I can see the chat. So I have a question, and I'm sure you are aware that many families who adopt children, that the children come from traumatic backgrounds or they have some type of trauma that has entered their life before the adoption. And, adoption can often be a very rocky journey for families. So this particular family said that they have a newly adopted 12-year-old from another country. She lived in an orphanage her entire life, had a trauma-filled life. They've done lots of training and trauma-informed play therapy every week. And she said she is a freezer. So she said they've come a long way, been with them almost a year. So they've learned more about her, what triggers her freeze in particular. And she said, what are some practical tips for when she does freeze? Because it's very challenging to remember that it's not willful defiance, but it's a fear response. So what are some tips you would have for this situation?
I think that, and I'm going to say what I personally needed. Okay, because a lot of times when I would freeze in class or, it was you want to make them do it, right? And it's not, I think remembering it's not that they won't, it's that they can't.
Right. And it's so hard to tell that line sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah. I know. It's like serious.
Confused, but there's usually some belligerence in the freezing. Right. I think that if we really listen to their emotional, feel their emotional aura, we can kind of tell the difference between, but even when they freeze out of out of willful disobedience, that is still some kind of communication. Why did they need to freeze? Right? What's happening?
Right.
I love, there are Ginger Healy for ATN. She's done 3 parenting during COVID videos, which there's a blog linked, and then in my handout, and then it goes to a bunch of resources. But she does a beautiful job with talking about going back to the beginning and helping them figure out what it was that triggered them. But in that moment, they froze. You're there. They're not doing any. And I think, what did I need in that moment? I just needed somebody to just sit down beside me.
Right.
Just sit there, not talk to me, not ask me questions, because I wasn't in my brain space that thought anything. I needed somebody to wrap a blanket around me. Wrapping a blanket around myself during therapy was a huge thing. It was huge. Even
to me that's comfort, that there was comfort that was needed that wasn't provided.
Right. And so I think anything that comes in low, anything that, because I can, I'm frozen and I can thaw, but I need to thaw by warmth.
Right.
And warmth in relationship is what helps me. And during therapy, and you find this in my books, which my first book is all about my process of therapy. The second one is more about behaviors, and the third one is the faith journey. But during that process, there were times where I just went and I sat with my child self who was hurting. I just sat there. I wrapped, in my mind, I wrapped a blanket around her. I did those things that I needed as a child. And I just needed someone to sit down on the floor beside me and just be there. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, oh my goodness, that really wouldn't have been that hard, would it?
Right.
You don't know, because you think you need to make them do something. And so yeah.
Right.
And I think that the important thing to remember is that children who've had trauma backgrounds, the most important thing in the world for them is to feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think about God's love for me, that I've had a very chaotic past 5 years. Let's just put it that way. If it was chaotic, I mean, I have given up almost everything that I've owned. We've moved across country. There's been so much chaos, but God put me someplace where I feel absolutely safe. And to me, that was God understanding what I needed was to feel safe when this hit, right?
Right.
And so but I made choices to do that. I think that we have to remember that God can't do anything that we don't choose to go along with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I hope that helps her. Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question that came in through the Facebook Live. It said that this lady's meeting with kids with trauma backgrounds in a school-based setting. She can lean on her faith, but she's not really free to share in that setting. So, what are some other ways that you would suggest that she help? I mean, you've just talked about what is often called ministry of presence. I mean, that immediately came to mind as you were talking about just having someone sit with you and, just let you be there, kind of be in that space where it hurts and you're scared, but you're also being comforted. So, I mean, what other things would you maybe offer to this lady?
That the illustration that where Jesus was skin on.
Right.
I mean, we could, even if she could talk about Jesus, that doesn't necessarily mean as much to those kids as the fact that she's present with them. And I think that our faith shows through. I know. Our faith shows through our actions.
Right.
And we've done, and we have the Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference where we talk about strategy. And I think acknowledging and respecting children from these kinds of backgrounds, and using trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive approaches will be something that they remember their whole life. And they will remember you. I'll say, talk to the person who asked this question. They will remember you, and they will want to know why you were able to be calm in the presence of their messiness. And I think, Jesus was that a lot.
Right.
He was just calm in the presence of messiness. And it's okay to be messy. Life is messy. Our emotions are messy. It's okay to be messy, and we need the adults in our lives and our friends, and to not try to make us cover that up, and to just allow the messiness and be like Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, years ago, we were dealing with a difficult situation. And, if you've been in church your whole life, you know a lot of these things, but sometimes God just really brings it home. And we were talking about something difficult with some other Christian leaders. And this one person said, you've got to drag it to the light. And, that is so true. I mean, we can't deal with things that are hidden in the darkness. Even if you can only let out a little bit of it at a time, the healing doesn't come until we're able to share it in some kind of way with God first, but then usually with somebody who is Jesus with skin on. So thank you so much for that illustration, because I think that's a really good one. So I think we have time for just one more question that came through the chat. This lady said that you started talking about 2 different kinds of breathing, and then we kind of went a different direction. So could you talk again about, what are 2 different kinds of breathing and how you'd recommend them for helping with trauma?
I think that emotional breathing is what we're talking about giving our emotions space. I think that and that's true for, emotions and the spiritual, you could incorporate into that. Physical breathing is where it's talking about a lot of exercises you could do that will help you in case you are exposed to, and to help your lungs be healthy. We ignore our breathing most of the time physically, and physical breath is important, but that emotional breath where we just open ourselves up and in acceptance of the created beings, that God created us with all of these emotions, warning systems, intuitions, everything. We aren't just a head that God talks to. We are a body. And I think that when I say breathing in 2 ways, when I say emotional breathing, that means the entire body. I was so disconnected from my body. If someone said, when my therapist would say, where do you feel that? In my head? No, you don't. Your feelings aren't in your head. Your feelings are in your body. And when you breathe emotionally and allow space for yourself, then you become connected to that. I don't know if that answers that or not.
Yeah, I think, but you're right. There is a difference, and being connected or reconnecting to your emotions is so important to getting past the lingering long-term, really devastating impacts of trauma or anything else that is preventing you from leading a fulfilling life as a result of things that happen early on.
I think that because sometimes we diminish what we're going through. Oh, well, I don't have it as bad as other people.
Right.
I've probably done that today, right? I said, well, I don't have that. It's like, but for me, it's legitimate for me. And I think that's part of that too, is that
Absolutely.
We accept where we are.
Right. Well, so it's 5 minutes till 1, sorry. So we're going to wrap up, but we did have another question about let's see, next step in the larger discussion of being trauma informed in church settings. So if you could just recommend maybe a couple of quick resources for churches, and then again, mention your website and the document that you've prepared. And we're going to have all these links posted in the description of the video on our Vimeo page, our YouTube channel, and also our COVID-19 page. So, so again, resources for trauma-informed churches, and if you've got any off the top of your head.
And they're in my,
Your document.
right, there's 2 books.
Okay.
And, that I list. There's also 2 videos. There are, I should have brought the book. I had it in here. I could have shown it.
But these are things that are all listed in the document you put together.
All listed in the document. And I think, so I want to say, when we talk about trauma informed, we're talking about a paradigm shift. We're talking about, I think the thing that has, and this, okay, I'm going to try to say this very concisely. It's not what is wrong with the person. It is what happened to the person. And it's not what is wrong with the child, but what happened to the child. And I think that because the church believes so strongly that people are responsible for their actions, it makes that paradigm shift difficult in the church. And I think that we need to understand that, yes, ultimately people, if they are mentally capable, but trauma changes the brain.
Right.
And trauma makes choices, good choices, very, very difficult. And I made good choices because I was a control freak. And I knew that to survive in the church, I had to do things right. And, but that did not mean that I lived an abundant life.
Right.
And I think that by stepping back from that responsibility piece and saying, we want people to heal so that they are able to experience the abundant life, is probably the most important thing I can say to the church. Is let's not make it about control. Let's make it about healing, the healing presence of God through therapy in my case, to heal so that I could actually access what I was trying to control. I have a blog about living the fruits of the Spirit through control. It's not abundant life.
Yeah.
It just isn't. So, but God wants us all to heal. That's what that verse is about. God came to heal the brokenhearted. Yeah. And my message is there's hope for healing. That's what I go everywhere saying, there's hope for healing.
Yeah, and only God can cure what's incurable. I mean, he promises that somewhere in Jeremiah. I remember that verse very distinctly because earlier in that same chapter, he says, you know, your wound is incurable, but then he said, I'm going to heal you. So, right. You know, only our Savior can do that. So, well, Janyne, thank you so much for your time today. And just real quickly, can you spell your name and or your website URL so that people can find you?
Yeah, if you just do Janyne, Janyne, and if you think about that being an I there, it makes sense that you say Janyne, even though Siri says J9. Okay, so but it's JANYNE and then .org.
Okay.
And that will take you there. And I have a lot of resources under the resource section. And this, actually my handout will be up there too. Okay. In the church ministries section. So I'm kind of walking a whole bunch of lanes. And so my website looks like that. It looks like I'm in a whole bunch of lanes, but lots of resources there.
Yeah, we're grateful that you're in a whole bunch of lanes, and we're really grateful that you took time to be with our audience today. And you know, we'll definitely be in touch and shoot you any questions or comments that we get ongoing. But again, thank you so much, Janyne, for joining us today. And for those of you who've taken your time to be with us, either through the webinar or on Facebook Live, thank you so much. Please do keep checking back with our events page, because we're having these webinars and conversations at least twice a week for the foreseeable future to talk about just a variety of things that we're all experiencing now as related to COVID-19. So with that, I just want to thank you again, Janyne. And, again, I'm Catherine Boyle with Key Ministry. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you.